All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Wise Wolf Gold and Crypto Show. I am your host, Tony Arterburn. I am with a very special guest, a gentleman I've wanted to have on for a very long time, someone I look up to and I've followed. I've seen him on, everywhere, anywhere that they're talking about of importance. They're talking about precious metals, commodities, markets, the financial system. You're going to see my guest is Andy Schectman. He is the owner of Miles Franklin Precious Metals, commentator and precious metals expert. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Tony. I appreciate it, brother. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're honored, and we were talking off air about, we have a little bit of commonality. We have family businesses that we run, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about your background, like coming up, and I know you started your business with your father. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was always the best and worst part about my job. I used to joke, but he's still alive, and looking back at it, it's been a blessing. My dad's middle name, but I guess it's important to phrase it in a few different ways, Tony. But what I'm really trying to say as I explain my background is the way that I look at gold and silver. And as we continue our discussion, maybe that should be the way people frame my answers. We're the least likely cast of characters to have achieved the level of success we have. My dad's middle name is Miles, and his best friend, who lent us $60,000 in 1989 to start a company on a wing and a prayer, his middle name was Franklin. And we started in a one-room office the size of a closet. My parents sold their life insurance policies. We come from nothing. My dad took a job a few years earlier out of desperation with a company in the United States, in Minneapolis. Don't know why I just said the United States. A company in Minneapolis called Investment Rarities, and he did it out of desperation. Both he and my mom worked in clothing industry. My dad worked with Champion, the sporting goods, gym wear, if you will, of whatnot, and they lost their job in the recession in like 83, and out of desperation took a job at Investment Rarities. He said he wanted that job like a hole in the head, but he had to put food on the table. He had a degree in history, had no understanding of economics and of precious metals, immersed himself in it, however, and very quickly understood it was not the what that mattered, but the why, and took to it like, fish to water. And was very successful right out the gate, and then ended up actually teaching the new brokers a year later on how to integrate into the company, and then was asked to speak around the world representing Investment Rarities, where he was met by some folks in Zurich, Switzerland, asked him to bring the concept of Swiss annuities to the United States. Annuities cut off of the Swiss insurance industry that had never seen a company failure in almost 300 years. So this is the genesis of it. So I'm 19 years old, went to the University of Minnesota to play baseball, hurt myself, go to work with my dad in a one-room office the size of a closet. My parents, as I mentioned, sold their life insurance policies, borrowed $60,000. This is before the internet. Typing a newsletter out on the word processor. Was fortunate enough to spend 3 summers in Zurich learning from Swiss bankers, 3 in a row when I was 19, 20, and 21, which shaped the way that I look at things. But before we got going, my dad said to me, look, there's only one rule and only one rule, and I'll fire you if you deviate from it. All right, cool, Dad. I can deal with one rule. What's that? He said, I won't let you make the same mistakes I made. As a younger man, you will buy something for yourself every week or every 2 weeks when you get paid, period. I don't care if it's 1 ounce of silver. You'll buy some metal and you'll put it away, period. All right, well, heck, if that's the only rule. Somehow, by the grace of God, Tony, we will be celebrating our 35th year in business and just over 10 billion in sales to date. This February will be 35 years. I don't know how we did it, but I've honored my promise to my dad, even though I've owned the company outright for almost 2 decades, and he's still alive. I talk to him every day. He won't fire me anymore, but I've bought something every 2 weeks for 35 years. And when I tell you it was the best gift I've ever been given in my life, it is. It was his way of teaching me the law of compounding. And whether it be the compounding of time, like, I know you're big into weightlifting. You didn't just go in the day after New Year's with a new resolution and work out really hard for 3 days to look like you do. It's the compounding of time and effort. Doesn't have to be interest. Time is a big compounding function as well. And you had mentioned offline about seeing me on Robert Kiyosaki's show. Robert and I have become friends, and we talk a lot about his board game that he made, which is basically getting out of the rat race. And if you don't pay yourself first, always, if you don't prioritize your future self, you never get out of the rat race. You mentioned to me that your son works for you, and I just hired my son. Also, he was at Price Waterhouse for a few years and wanted him to find himself first, and now he's working for me, and I made him do the same thing that my father did me. But your son, just like mine, is, it's kind of like you 20 years ago. And if you could say something to yourself 20 years ago, like, hey, man, we got things to do in the future, so pay yourself. Start taking care of your future self. Prioritize yourself. Let the laws of compounding work for you rather than against you. Give yourself a chance to get out of the rat race by prioritizing, because if you're anything like me, you wake up one day and you're like, well, man, where'd all the time go? I still feel like I'm 25, but I'm not. And where'd the time go? And the best gift that I've ever been given, in the way I look at precious metals, is that it's wealth. It's wealth, Tony, that's outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, anything the world's ever thrown at it. It's wealth that the most influential, well-informed traders in the world are acquiring at a level the world's never seen, that being the central banks. And interestingly enough, repatriating it all, bringing it home from the New York Fed and the Bank of England, the 2 centers that gave direct access to the COMEX and the LBMA. They don't care. I want it in my possession because it is asset. It is an asset that has no counterparty liability. It is simultaneously an asset that is not someone else's liability, in other words. And I think that when we talk about gold and when we talk about the success of my company, it's, to me, it's just common sense. And that's one thing that we've used. We've talked about information and education for 35 years under one fundamental tenet, and that is that gold and silver are not investments, and they may perform like one, but they're wealth. And if you look at it that way, it makes the ups and the downs become inconsequential. My mentor, Richard Russell, always said, and at the time, it's like, yeah, easy to say when you're struggling to buy it, but in the end, he's like, you'll define your wealth by number of ounces. And it's true. You don't look and remember what you paid for this. You could probably figure it out, but it's about the number of ounces. So as we continue this discussion, sorry to be so long-winded.
No,
I just want you to know that, to me, it's wealth. And it's wealth that I hope I never need to use. Maybe for an opportunity. Everyone looks at it for an emergency. Maybe there's a hell of an opportunity, but if not, I know that I can give it to my kids. I got 3. And long after something like this is hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian as an example of what used to be, gold and silver will still be immutable wealth, even in the year 3000, when my great-great-great-grandchildren are using the gold and silver that were passed down throughout the ages. And that, to me, is how I look at metal, not as an investment more than anything.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. You were talking about lessons from fathers, and I've heard you talk about that before. And you're going to save something, put away something, and keep it, and you measure your wealth by your ounces. And of course, what you're talking about too, in the sense that gold and silver outlast countries, they outlast currencies. My son did the same thing. I've been telling him, put something away. We had a coin come in a few weeks ago. It was a gold Soviet coin from the Soviet Union, 1979, and that's the year I was born. But he said, "Hey, Dad, can I take this in lieu of salary? Can I just take this? Can I take the gold coin? I'll use it." And I said, "Sure, I'll give you a bonus for this week, and that can be your salary." He put that away, and I told him, I said, "You see, that coin is, again, minted by a country that no longer exists, but the gold remains." The same thing with the Roman Empire, any other civilization that it's fallen or collapsed, or any currency that's collapsed. And we're literally in an experiment. This since 1971, when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. We're in some sort of experiment, and it looks like this is the end game of basically for Gresham's law, where when bad money or enters the system, good money goes into hiding. At this point, we're reaching really just a tipping point where it's going to have like a swing back, a pendulum effect. That's what it looks like to me, because of the debt, because of the currency creation. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you see like a complete pivot? That's what I see when the BRICS nations. To me, the BRICS meetings and all the things that are going on aren't necessarily about them creating a unified currency, more about cross-border payment systems and the revaluation of commodities. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a high probability we'll see gold revalued. I do. And I think that it will experience a renaissance of sorts. People are very unaware of things that have been built into the system right now. The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb, everyone should watch, talking about the rise of the DTCC. You can go to YouTube and you can go to his website. I think it's greattaking.com. His book is downloadable PDF. It's free, or I would advise going to YouTube and let him narrate his book for you. It's about an hour. When you talk about what's going on with the banks, the First National Bank of Lindsay, Oklahoma, that just failed 2 weeks ago Friday, that's the first bail-in in this country. 50% of the uninsured deposits are gone. Of course, when Silicon and Signature failed, hundreds of millions, if not billions, of uninsured deposits were covered because it was Oprah Winfrey's money and tech startups and Hollywood. And well, that was too systemic of a risk for the system, according to Janet Yellen and the FDIC and the FOMC and the president. But people are unaware that the Dodd-Frank Act called for bank bail-ins instead of bailouts, where you are an unsecured general creditor, last to be paid. People will wake up, I think, if you see a big bank fail, not this little unreported podunk flyover part of America in rural Oklahoma with only 7 million in uninsured deposits. Half of it are gone, just like that. Bye-bye. You have $1 million in that bank, you get $250. That's the FDIC insurance. You get half of your uninsured. That's $750. Half is what, $375 plus $250. That's $625. That other $375, you kiss it goodbye. If they do have it says that, well, you might get more when we sell off the assets of the bank, which in the article it says are far less than its liabilities to creditors and others, whatever others are. But the Dodd-Frank Act says they have up to 4 years to pay that out, and in the form of bank stock of the new bank. It's just horrible. They'll never get that money back again. But what if that were to happen to a big regional bank, a big one, and it's bailed in and people don't even know bail-in exists? What's going to happen? And they'll look, and you will see a renaissance. We have begun to see, after a 2-year drawdown in the ETFs, like right down a 45-degree angle, we're seeing it pick up, where the Western ETFs are now starting to acknowledge what gold and silver are. You got guys, like Stanley Druckenmiller and Paul Tudor Jones talking about gold, and Druckenmiller saying something to the extent of, if you don't own gold, you don't know economics. It is beginning to fall lightly into the subconscious of the investor. But largely, one of the things that's so interesting about that statement, Tony, is that we've seen gold defy what the Western economists would say is impossible. And that is, we've seen a strong dollar. Even if you believe the information out of the BLS, you should take the L, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, throw that in the garbage and just call it the BS, the bullshit, and the the CPI. If we believe that, which it's a lie. I mean, John Williams of shadowstats.com will tell you inflation's 11%, not 3.5%. But even if we believe it, we've had a positive real return between short-term treasuries and inflation. We've had a strong dollar. We've had outflows out of the Western ETFs, meaning no Western participation, and yet gold still goes higher and higher and higher, outperforming everything. It's doubled the performance of the 10-year Treasury over 25 years. It's beaten the S&P 500 over that same time period since 2000, even with dividends reinvested, which has averaged about 9.6% versus 9.9 on gold. It's an asset that it's like the tortoise, and it's not flashy like the hare, just keeps on marching ahead, and it hasn't been noticed. You add into it something like a bank failure or some sort of an event that wakes people up to the systemic nature of the system, I think you would see much, much, much more mainstream participation. And as someone who's in the gold industry like yourself, I think you would agree, and it's not talking our books collectively, that something like that, Rick Rule's a buddy of mine, and he says that there's a 0.5% participation, 0.5% from Joe and Jane six-pack to the Harvard Endowment Fund across the whole financial matrix in this country in metals. And if that went to 5%, that's a tenfold increase in demand. How hard would it be for you to get product and a tenfold increase in demand across the country? Because they say there's no bull market like a metals bull market for one reason, that the scarier the world gets or the higher the price of gold and silver goes. I mean, gold was $1,200 in 2000 or 10 years ago in
Yes.
2015. So it's well over doubled. If you called any of your clients and said, hey, man, you've doubled your money and then some, you want to sell it? They had, no, thanks, Tony. Appreciate you checking in on me, but no, I'm not going back into dollars. And that's kind of what it's like, is that the higher the price goes only reinforces the grip people have on their gold and silver. So yeah, I see a time where getting product becomes very difficult as the public wakes up, whether it be through a banking crisis, election interference, you name it. I mean, look, there's 25 million people in this country illegally, which bothers the hell out of me. And if 1 or 5% of those people are pissed off at this country, well, you do the math. I mean, that's 1.1 million people or so. That's kind of crazy. So, you're talking a standing army. There's so many points along the, possibility curve of what could wake people up to owning metals that very quickly could change the entire landscape of this industry like that overnight, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it was Churchill said something about the terrible ifs. The terrible ifs accumulate. We have so many things in the periphery that threaten the status quo, the stability, the economic order of things. No, you're absolutely right. And the mainstream doesn't cover this like they should. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't recognize, like what you just talked about with gold stats and weighing it against the market. It's just, again, it's not flashy. It's like the tortoise, like you said. But what is interesting is a lot of that is changing, because you go back to 2011. What was the all-time high at 2011? Was it close to
1915?
1915. I knew we got close to 2000. But I was saying this on my show the other day. If you look at that chart, it's 2011, and you fast forward to the next all-time high was 2020, right? And I believe I was hosting a show for the David Knight Show on InfoWars live when that happened, and they put the gold price up. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a huge milestone. And then, it took another couple of years. I think it hit another ATH after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But now, Andy, I think it's had an all-time high. What's it, 34 times in the last 9 months or something like it?
Yeah, it keeps on marching higher. And, it's interesting. The question is, well, first of all, it's been at all-time highs against most of the currencies of the world for quite some time now. You look at silver as an example. It's at all-time highs right now against the rupee, the rand, I think the Canadian dollar, pretty close to the euro. Again, the inordinate, unjustified strength of the dollar masks what gold and silver are really doing. But I did an interview with a member of parliament from the UK recently, and he said, Andy, money creation in the West in the United States has averaged 7% for the last 10 years. Now, I think that's low, but let's just talk about what has happened. If that's true, money creation, Tony, is the definition of inflation. It's not prices. That's price inflation. That's the symptom of money creation, and it's the symptom of inflation. So if we believe that if if we believe that 7% rate is accurate, there's something called the law of 70 seconds, which is mathematical law. You take an interest rate divided into 72, and it tells you how long before your principal doubles. So in this case, if money creation or inflation, where you inflate the money supply, has been averaging on average 7% per year for the last decade, that would then say 7 into 72, 10 years, 10.2 years. 10.2 years ago, our dollar was worth double what it's worth today. And if that's true, well, gold was $1,200 in 10 years ago, in 2014. So did the dollar lose half of its value, or did gold just over double? My point is that you can make that. Over my shoulder, you got Roosevelt confiscating gold with his executive order there, a $20 gold coin and a $20 gold certificate. And the gold certificate says payable to the bearer on demand in gold coin instead of in God we trust. But let's just pretend Grandpa left you 500 of these and 500 of these. Now, the $20 gold certificate's worth more than a $20 bill. I'll give you that. But just for the sake of argument, $520 bills in one shoebox for grandson Tony, and $520 gold coins. They were interchangeable. It's the same thing. It's an ounce of gold, just about, for grandson Tony. And you open up that box, when you're 18 years old, it's presented to you by your parents, and this was from your grandfather, and God rest his soul, and the whole 9 yards. And well, that $20 bill, even though you got $10,000 worth, but okay, $10,000, 500 of them. That's a lot of money. It's great. But the same amount in gold, which were interchangeable, it's worth $1 million plus. And, so when you talk about did gold go up or did the dollar go down, $20 back then in 1933 would have bought you a suit, a tie, an overcoat, shoes, the whole 9 yards. And today that $20 bill wouldn't even buy you a tie. It might buy you your shoelaces, but it's not going to buy you the suit. That ounce of gold is still going to buy you everything. So it's gold hangs with the declining value of the dollar, the inherent inflation that's built into the system. The Fed talks about striving for a 2% inflation rate. We're never going to get to 2. We're already, they pivoted when they're 65% away from their 2% target rate. So they didn't signal a victory on inflation. They're waving the white flag. But I've always thought, why pick 2%? How about negative 2%? Because the lower the inflation rate, the higher the standard of living. Inflation's not going anywhere. We have a $36 trillion debt nearly, and $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government, military pensions. At a time when the appetite from the rest of the world for our treasuries of any duration, I think they're uninvestable. Myself, 10 years and out, you ought to be out of your mind to buy a 10-year treasury paying 4%. It's a guaranteed bond of confiscation. It's you might as well kiss your purchasing power goodbye. So who would want to hold it? Point of it is that we're entering a period of time that is vastly different than ever before. And I think a lot of the smart money is replacing gold with treasuries, or the other way around, replacing treasuries with gold. It has no counterparty risk. It's doubled its performance. It doesn't have inflation risk. In fact, it retains its value through inflationary cycles. That's what this is all about. It's the rest of the world understands, and maybe the weaponizing of the treasury market certainly helped, but the fiscal irresponsibility of this government, where we're creating 100,000 in debt every second, 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep on going, $1 trillion every 90 days. $1 trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. It took 200 years to do it the first time. We're doing it in between 90 and 100 days. The irresponsibility is off the charts, and that's not going to end. So this is why you own gold. This is the important part of it. And this is why the biggest money in the world is moving in this direction, accumulating gold, repatriating it, selling treasuries, or letting them roll off their balance sheet, because they understand that this is a country that has chosen inflation over austerity. This is a nation that's got big problems with debt, with immigration, with judicial system, with the electoral system, with the wokeness, with all of this crap that used to be the hallmark of this great country. This is why I personally want President Trump to win, to regain some sanity. We're so far departed from the culture. Our culture is being whitewashed. The monetary stuff you can deal with. You look back at this country stand with its back against the wall. It's always risen to the occasion, but the difference is we were unified. Look at World War II. We were all Americans, and we weren't defined by who we voted for in the last election. And you didn't have to go to Thanksgiving where your wife says to you like she does to me, don't say a damn word, not a word until at least dessert, okay? Because I'd like to finish dinner tonight, because I'm that guy that will, get into a conversation and then all of a sudden it gets heated at the dinner table with your family, because that's how divided we are on these issues. So these are times unlike any I think we've ever seen. And this is why you can only save the world one person at a time, starting with yourself and your immediate family. But yeah, I think as the Chinese curse says, Tony, may we live in interesting times. The next several days, as we're recording this day before the election, I think all bets are off to see how things. I left Minnesota and moved to Florida 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, in what was supposedly the peaceful George Floyd protests in Minneapolis, and they were anything but peaceful. So let's hope that we don't see a repeat. But something tells me one way or the other, you got half the country pissed off and really angry about how this all unfolds. I hope I'm wrong. I truly do.
I don't think you are. Unfortunately, I think that's just built into the system now. It's got to play out, and there's a lot of unknowns. Again, that's where in an uncertain world, where people are running to precious metals, commodities, the stability of the dollar, the stability of our institutions is come apart. And you can look at cyclical history that happens. If you follow the historians Strauss and Howe, they wrote a book called The Fourth Turning. We're basically 80 years out from Bretton Woods. So it's between 80 and 100 years is the Romans call it a saccharum, or you have a major change in society. And that's playing out. That was the end of World War II. It was, the out of the Great Depression and all that. That was that last fourth turning. And then this one. And let's hope that it's not exactly like the last one. It doesn't have to culminate in a giant war or anything, an upheaval or anything like that. Maybe it's a lot of institutional changes, but that is the order of the day. It's chaos. Yeah. And trying to find some stability in the chaos is the goal. It should be the goal of anybody who's paying attention. But the days of what we perceived as normal, if you have normalcy bias, that's very dangerous right now, because change is in the wind, not stability.
It's very common at the end of long macro trends to have that recency and normalcy bias. It's normal, and there's a whole school of investing, Tony, called wave theory, Elliott wave and Kondratiev wave. And you got a lot of people who put a lot of stock in the validity. And the whole thing is based on human emotions. And the peaks and the valleys that have been seen for centuries in the way humans react to things, and the euphoria and the chaos and the fear. And that's something that I think is that's why so few people succeed in investing, where the smart people find value in things that are undervalued and underloved, and they see the bigger picture and understand that the human emotion takes over. So you have a lot of people here that look at this as a nothing burger, no big deal, that everything is great in this country, will always remain that way until it doesn't. And then you get this mass wave of panic and emotional driven buying or selling or whatever it may be. I think it's appropriate to look at things that way. Most people can't get out of the way of what they don't see coming. Right. And when this comes, it's going to catch so many people off guard. Just ask people, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? You won't get maybe one intelligent answer out of 100. Ask people, what is a bail-in? Do you know what it is? Or what is the Dodd-Frank Act? Or you can ask them all, what are the BRICS? What's the Belt Road Initiative? You can ask them all of these questions, and most of them will just be ignored, or they'll say, I don't know. Tell me about it. And where is the reporting? Why aren't we being told that gold was reclassified the world's only other tier one reserve asset next to US dollars and treasuries? Is that why all the central banks are buying it and selling treasuries? I mean, these are the things that we need to know to think critically, but we're not being told them. You have to go to alternative media like yourself, and I'm all right with that. But the legacy media has failed this country in many respects. You can look at the lawsuit Trump is levying upon CBS, and 60 Minutes as a prime example of that. They are not helping the public make an informed decision. In fact, they're so biased that the decisions become visceral if compared with the other side. In other words, how could you support this guy, this and that? Because the message has been distorted and poisoned by the media, which I hate to say, but in every respect, I believe it.
Oh, I believe it. I mean, you can tell that they serve some sort of narrative function for institutions that have nothing to do with finding the truth or investigating anything or shedding light on anything. Maybe at one time they did, but I don't take any stock in what's out on the mainstream. I have to go searching for what the true headlines should be. I mean, gosh, Andy, we lost the petrodollar, and nobody said anything, and that's like the cornerstone of what our the currency's based off of. After Nixon took us off the gold standard, was it 70, 73, 74? We did the agreement with the Saudis to denominate all the crude transactions in dollars, basically OPEC, and that's what made the petrodollar. And if you study U.S. foreign policy, it was always assumed that a lot of the things that we did that were Middle Eastern centered or around that area was to prop up the petrodollar. And they literally just let it lapse. I mean, how do you explain that? How do you explain that there was no resistance, no summit, no, trying to codify anything? They just literally just let it go. And I have so many questions about that. What was your take on that?
Well, look at our lead economic advisor. Many of your listeners may remember Jared Bernstein on Twitter trying to explain bond sales. It was the most humiliating thing I've ever seen. He's our lead economic advisor. He's a dude with a degree in music and a master's degree in social work. He calls himself an inclusionary economist, whatever the hell that means. But his whole thesis is to lose the reserve status, that it's a privilege we can no longer afford. And, signing an executive order to go green when our relationship with OPEC and Saudi Arabia is the linchpin to the hegemony is really not the smartest thing in the world to do. And then by weaponizing the dollar and creating an environment where, because half of the petrodollar deal was, yes, we will protect you, Saudi Arabia, and by extension, the Saudi kingdom, and you'll value oil in dollars, but then you'll take the excess and recycle it into U.S. treasuries. Well, the treasury market has been weaponized. Last year was the first year in 45 years where gold was less volatile than the 10-year treasury. And you can see where we make it seem like to the world that rates will stay low forever and then jack them up after everyone loads up on them by 500 basis points in a year, which destabilizes the treasury market. So we sign an executive order to go green. We weaponize our treasury. And, the way that a lot of these countries look at us is hypocritical. Janet Yellen can say, well, we're okay with Xi Jinping and Putin being buddies, in the BRICS. And my initial thought was, well, that's very nice of you, Madam Secretary. Thank you. But if one penny is given by Xi to the Putin war machine, will sanction their banks, their companies in Beijing itself. And I'm thinking, well, what about the 200 billion we've given the Ukraine and the Stinger missiles and the F-16s with no congressional oversight? Does that not count for anything? Or the fact that we have invaded Iraq 20 years ago under false pretenses, never found those weapons of mass destruction, destroyed their country, toppled their regime. And guess what? We're still here. 20 years later, hey, we're still here. And we're sanctioning 14 of their banks for trading with sanctioned banks in Iran to secure liquid natural gas to cool their homes in the summer. So we sanctioned them while we're still there. They made $90 billion in oil revenue in 2023, asked us for $1 billion towards the end of the year. Can we have our money back? It's held at the Federal Reserve in New York. They can't even control their own natural resource 20 years later. And we're like, yeah, it's yours, but this isn't a good time. Come back next year. So what have they done? They're kicking Western coalition forces out of the country. They have formally applied to the BRICS. They make trading in dollars illegal. And as of January, earlier in the year here, 8 months ago, they got rid of all dollar bills in any bank in the country. So, our actions of weaponization, of hypocrisy, perceived hypocrisy, mismanagement of the dollar, signing an executive order to go green. When your point, the 50-year anniversary was in August, and the Saudis didn't sign the exclusivity deal. They said, yeah, we'll still take dollars, but we're going to take other things too. That lights the fuse, really, on the hegemony. In fact, I would argue that killed the hegemony.
Yes.
It didn't kill the supremacy. We're still the supreme currency in the world, but we're not the only. See, that synthetic demand for the dollar because every country had to stockpile it for oil for the last 50 years is a huge deal. And what the West did to the BRICS this week, to me, will only crystallize their resolve. I don't know if you're familiar with what the BIS did at the 12th hour to the BRICS, which is right out of a James Bond movie, Tony. I mean, it seriously is to me. It's like I don't know. It's right out of it's. Let me just get to the point. So I've talked a lot. So there's a man named Sergey Glazyev, and for 4 years I've talked about this stuff on 4,000 YouTube videos. And the reason I said that there would be a common settlement currency, not a common currency for the BRICS, but a common settlement currency for energy, particularly in commodities, was because Sergey Glazyev, who is the Eurasian Economic Union finance minister, he said there would be, that we would have a basket of commodities and a basket of currencies, and this will ultimately be the BRICS system. And I researched him a lot, read a lot about him, followed his work, and believed that that's where we were going to go. And we kept reading about this. And so last year, the China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE announced that Project M-Bridge is now operational. And they did 2 test trades. China traded digital yuan with the United Arab Emirates, who is a BRICS member, to buy oil and to buy gold. 2 transactions. And I said, that's interesting. They chose those 2 because I believe they're both being remonetized. Iran awarded the biggest contract they've ever given to any other country to remodernize their biggest airport in Iran and gave it to China, and they're paying for it in oil. And you can see when China goes around and uses their digital yuan, whether it be to buy corn and soybeans from Brazil or technology from Russia, they're paying with this digital yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So gold and oil are becoming worth more than the currency that purchased it. But M-Bridge was designed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE. It's a cross-border payment system that allows these countries to trade their own central bank digital currencies with each other, free from any interference in the SWIFT system. It's a big deal. And standing behind this program is the Bank of International Settlements, which is a Western institution. And I've always saw that and kind of just conveniently looked past it. It was my mistake. Well, before I go down that road, let me back up and backfill. So there was a meeting that coincided with the G7 meeting in Italy a month and a half ago. And it was a BRICS meeting in Novograd, Russia, where Dilma Rousseff came out, and she's the former president of Brazil. She's the head of the BRICS New Development Bank. And she said publicly that we've agreed in principle to a new settlement currency called the unit. It will be gold backed by 40%, 60% in the BRICS plus currencies. It will be redeemable. It will be held within the borders of the countries that mint their own tokens. That's why we've seen 40 countries repatriate their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed. It's less to do with the weaponization and more to do with the fact that I believe it would be the backing of a new settlement currency that, instead of being held like the Bank of England to give access to the LBMA or New York to give access to the COMEX, the white paper on the unit says it will be held within the borders of the countries that make these unit tokens that will be traded over M-Bridge. So they say it's going to be traded over M-Bridge. Then all of a sudden you see Saudi Arabia join as a 5th participant. So Saudi Arabia doesn't go to the meeting for the G7. They go to the meeting for BRICS at the same time, where it's announced that it will be the M-Bridge will be the platform to trade a new settlement currency pegged to gold. And it's free. It's not compatible with US dollar or the SWIFT system at this time. So it would be a way for energy to be sold in local currencies, trade done in local currencies, back and forth, free from the ability of the SWIFT to stop it, to impose sanctions. And the BIS Innovation Hub is also behind it. They've been helping develop this. They're the ones that reclassified gold tier 1. in 2019, they're the ones pulling the strings in many respects. And my mistake in this was to overlook the BIS's role in all of this. And I was given an interview with Michelle McCory 2 weeks ago of Kitco, and she might be the best interviewer I've ever given interviews with. I tell her that because not only does she do her homework, she always says to me before we start listening, I agree with most of what you're saying, Andy, but I am going to push back because that's what good journalists do. I said, all right, Michelle, I'm ready for you. Throw at me whatever you got. And she says, when I say this, I say, look, they've agreed in principle. Delma Rousseff comes out and says, we have agreed in principle to this new token. It's called the unit. It'll be traded over Mbridge. Mbridge is a cross-border payment system, and these countries can trade with one another. No SWIFT intervention. Saudi Arabia just became the 5th full participant. Dollar is not compatible. This is the future of settlement in the global south that will circumvent the dollar. And she said something to me, and it was like, ding, 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 ding. Why didn't I think about this more? She says, but Andy, isn't the BIS a Western institution?
That's what I was.
And I'm like, yeah, you're right, Michelle. And so we go back and forth. And I'm like, it was strange that the BRICS came out in their little manifesto that they made, or their whatever you want to call it, like a 50-page thing. I tried to read all of it. Kind of like a document of how it all went down during their meeting, this big meeting that they just had. And I found it interesting that they were saying things like, we subscribe to be good partners with the WHO, the World Health Organization. I'm like, what? And the BIS and the IMF and the United Nations. And I'm thinking, wow, maybe Michelle and I were on to something, because, maybe these people at the BIS, the big bankers, the old, Western bankers, they realize they can't have a one world currency like they always wanted, but maybe they'll have a 2-world currency where you have Project Cedar and Agora from the West with Project Mbridge from the East, and they would integrate with Mbridge, and you can have the BIS and the IMF pulling the strings on top of a digital system. Instead of having a one world currency, they'll have a one world system that they can stay on top of. Okay, going down that road. Now, here's where it gets dirty. Here's where it's like, I don't know, it's where it's espionage. It's right out of a BRICS meeting. I mean, right out of a James Bond movie, what I'm trying to say. So you have this thing going on where the BIS was standing behind it for 5 years and developing this. You get this knucklehead Vedat Patel come out of the State Department recently and say any challenge to the SWIFT system and the dollar's role is a threat to global democracy. A week ago, Paul Krugman says that de-dollarization is in fact impossible because there just aren't any good alternatives. And you got the State Department come out and say any alternatives to the SWIFT system and the dollar are a threat to global democracy. Really, that was an interesting statement to hear from us. But here's where it gets dirty. So now remember, this has been going on for 5 years with the backing of the BIS, helping China, Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE, and now Saudi Arabia. And you can't make this up. They say the article is titled "Mbridge Being Shut Down?" ? And you get this guy named Augustus Carstens, who looks like Augustus from Willy Wonka, only grown up. And he's the BIS general manager. And he says, we cannot directly support any project for the BRICS because we cannot operate with countries that are subject to sanctions. I just want to be very clear about that. And then you get Agath Demarius, a senior policy fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations. In the long run, there is no doubt that the mechanisms like BRICS Bridge could be useful for China, Russia, or others to hide sensitive transactions from Western authorities. The underlying technology is a tool to circumvent sanctions and potentially undermine the dollar's dominance in the global financial system. So my question to you is, Tony, where the hell have they been for the past 4 years, 3 years? All of this shit that's been going on with Russia, they just now, the day that, during the meeting, after it's viable, it's been launched, it's ready to go, even only in minimal terms, like they're like, yeah, it's going to grow much bigger, but it is now minimally viable. We can start trading on it. And the BIS is standing behind it. The Innovation Hub's been helping these countries for years. They know that it's a BRIC settlement currency platform that sidesteps SWIFT. They know that R stands for Russia in the BRICS. And then they announce, just so y'all know, we can't do this. We're going to pull the plug at the 12th hour. It's like, you want to talk about espionage or James Bond or dirty. We help you set it up for 4 years. We build this damn thing with you. And right when you roll it out, now we're pulling the plug. Sorry, because Russia's involved. Where was this rhetoric leading up to this? Where was it 2 years ago? And so when you talk about crystallizing the resolve of these countries, it just further explains why these countries don't trust the West. And, Michelle was right. I should have focused on it more. But this is a very fluid, changing deal. People used to say to me, Andy, the West won't go down easy on this. And I always thought, what are they going to do? This is exactly how they do it. They infiltrated. They saw the technology that was mostly Chinese-based. They stood behind it. They helped it. They foster it. Here we are at the last moment. Boom, pull the plug. Now, it hasn't officially been pulled yet, but even the fact that they're saying this, and the head of the IMF says, we can't do anything that will, allow a sanctioned country to, the IMF or the BIS won't be part of that. It's pretty dirty, if you ask me.
It is very dirty, and it really gives them an opportunity to play the U.S. and our currency against others, and the commodities and cross-border payments. It's something like Thomas Jefferson said, that merchants have no country. That you're talking about the banking institutions, and that's really, it is out of a Bond movie. I mean, that's what, a Bond narrative, because that was the villain. Was somebody that was part of the banking. They call it combines. The banking combines and consortiums that unite together or whatever to form their own agenda. And that's really what this is. That's a paradigm shift, though, because you kind of think that it's monolithic. That there's the West, there's the institutions that were, of course, the BIS precedes the Great Depression. I'm pretty sure that it goes back a little bit before. But the IMF was born out of Bretton Woods, the World Bank, and other things. So that's interesting. That it's not something that's a competing system. They are literally part of the new rollout. They've decided to jump ship, it looks like, or at least play both ends against the middle.
Yeah, and so the West has, we have something called Project Cedar and Project Agora, which are answers, if you will, to the BI or to the M bridge. But it really, I think, shows why these countries won't trust us anymore. Even Putin said during a meeting in St. Petersburg not too long ago that the Bretton Woods system is dead, and the dollar is backed by nothing but trust. And this is trust that just goes to show much of the world doesn't trust us anymore. And this is exactly why. And, you mentioned, do you think gold will be revalued earlier? I do. It's held, ironically, in an account on every central bank balance sheet, what's called the gold revaluation account. That's the name of it. You can't make that up. And the head of the Dutch National Bank has been calling to revalue gold for ages, where he's saying, look, we got 35 billion in gold valued at $35 an ounce on our balance sheet. It's still valued at the Bretton Woods price. In the current rules, the reason it's called the gold revaluation account, it's actually a liability on their balance sheet. The asset itself is on the asset side. They mirror each other, so they balance out. You're not allowed to use those funds to offset liabilities. They're like, well, why don't we just change that rule, revalue the price of gold, and our balance sheet goes from putrid to pristine, just like that. And I always thought that was interesting. That's pretty much what Roosevelt did in 1933 after he confiscated gold. He devalued the dollar by 40%, paid everyone $20, then devalued the dollar by 40%, and gold was immediately worth 35. And I figured, well, they could do that. But he was the only one talking about it. Then you get Cynthia Loomis, the senator from Wyoming, who's now talking about it, saying, she spoke at the Bitcoin meeting in Tennessee a month or two ago when Trump spoke and talked about building a strategic Bitcoin account. And she said, yeah, she followed him right after he got off stage, said, I'm going to float a bill down to the House floor that says we should revalue the gold that the Federal Reserve is holding on behalf of the Treasury and revalue it to a level sufficient enough to take some of those proceeds and buy Bitcoin for the strategic account. As crazy as it sounds, it's not so crazy. I mean, Janet Yellen wouldn't even need congressional approval to do it. She would just tell Jerome Powell, here's what gold is. And then the Fed or the Treasury could then make an open declaration to any sovereign entity, you want to send us your gold, we'll pay you X for it. Every $4,000 increase in the price of gold gives $1 trillion free and clear to the Treasury general account. And that's kind of, I said this to Michelle, I didn't love the title of our talk, something like gold to 130,000. I think people looked at it as kind of hyperbolic, but my point to her was, well, in a world where Bitcoin can be $1 million, where people don't think twice about that, why couldn't gold be 130,000? You put it at that level, you've now completely wiped out the liability side of your balance sheet or offset it with assets. In other words, you put it at 130,000 an ounce, tell every country in the world, you want to sell us your gold? Here's your money. We'll pay 130,000 an ounce. And now your balance sheet is perfect. You've offset the liabilities with an asset. And, it would behoove every central bank on the planet. They're the ones all accumulating it. We know that they're intending to peg it to a system. Even the IMF, you mentioned it came out of Bretton Woods. It's interesting. There was an article in 2020 where, on the Bretton Woods website saying we want a new Bretton Woods. It's 150 or so countries that comprise the Bretton Woods. They all want a new Bretton Woods. And even the BRICS in their last meeting last week said, we want a new Bretton Woods. That means they want a new dollar system, something that's different than what we already have. So Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, talks about this sort of. They wrote a report at the beginning of last year, and it's something like, you could Google it. It says, gold as an international reserve, a barbarous relic no more, ? And she came out recently and said any central bank digital currency not pegged to something is fiat. Well, why would it be gold? Because the BIS, the most powerful bank in the world, who we just got through talking about, reclassified gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset in 2019. This is why it would make sense. And that's next to US dollars and treasuries. That's why it would make sense to use gold and distributed ledger technology, AKA blockchain, to peg these two or marry these two together to provide some form of credibility to a system that lacks it. So, yeah, I think these are crazy, crazy times, brother. And I do think that gold will be central to a system that is in desperate need of trust, because you can see we've done our best to squander the good graces that our foreign creditors have given us for a long time, to squander the privilege of being the world reserve currency. But after all, that's what our lead economic advisor advocates for. In his report called Dethrone King Dollar, that was picked up in the New York Times and the Washington Post, he advocates for it. Privilege we can no longer afford. So you can't make a lot of this stuff up. But I do think that we have done more to destroy this country, the current administration has, in the last 4 years than any external foe ever could have done. We've weaponized the dollar. We've inflated the crap out of it. We've let 25 million people in here illegally. There are questions on the integrity of all of the cornerstones and hallmarks of this country, from the judicial system, the FBI, the electoral system, immigration system, everything. And we're printing money at the pace of 100,000 in debt per second, 24/7. So that's not what you do if you want to be the world reserve currency and then sign an executive order to go green, which is spitting in the face of, what makes the dollar, what gives it its hegemony, the petro status. So all of these things taken together, in and of themselves, each one of these things are bad enough. You put them all together and you can see a pattern. And it is a pattern of, is this too stupid to be stupid? Are we trying to reset the system?
Right.
Are we incentivizing the world to dump dollars? Are we incentivizing the world to find alternatives? I don't know. I mean, and then again, you see the BIS do this. I just don't know, other than to say that the actions that our government has, the path that they're taking us down, is a very dangerous one. And again, I'll say, is it too stupid to be stupid? because ultimately this all leads to a reset or a revaluation of gold or a reset of the system that is highly over leveraged and undercapitalized. And it's been a privilege to be the world reserve currency. We should be clinging to it instead of destroying the value of the dollar, destabilizing the treasury market, weaponizing it, and going around the world imposing sanctions, which many believe to be hypocritical. You couldn't draw up a better thing to not do if you wanted to retain your reserve status. But this is why I think you see the rise of the BRICS and all of these countries that are pushing back against this nonsense. Where does it lead? I guess only time will tell. But if there were a new settlement system for energy, yes, it would disincentivize the holding of dollars and the synthetic demand that has been created for every country having to own dollars to buy energy. If that was gone, well, all that money comes rushing home, which creates hyperinflation, which then would push interest rates to the moon to compensate, which would then collapse the entire system. Yeah. Stocks, bonds, real estate, the dollar, the banking system, the insurance companies. That's the Klaus Schwab moment. And now you point to those sons of bitches. They did it to us. They did it to us. Rallying cry. And that's when you get into maybe a CBDC. Lael Brainerd, the number 2 advisor for the U.S. government, if she wins, Lael Brainerd will run the Federal Reserve. She's a modern monetary theorist. She was number 2 under Powell recently, where she left after being at the Treasury. She went to the Fed. She developed or worked on the CBDC with MIT when Biden signed it, fast-tracked its development, one of his first executive orders. She just ran Point for Fed Now, which is Venmo and Zelle on steroids, backed by the Fed. It's being piloted right now. She's a modern monetary theorist. What better way to issue a CBDC than when the whole system collapses? And they did it to us because they dumped the petrodollar. And now people would be less hesitant to take a central bank digital currency if they were made whole when everything blew up, than being forced to take it or even being incentivized to take it under orderly conditions because of the tracking and the loss of privacy and all that kind of stuff. But in an event where people have to take it to survive, they will. Could that be where they're going? I don't know. All I'm simply saying is that all of these things together make you go, it's interesting. And we really haven't been good stewards of the world reserve currency.
I mean, in my opinion, I look at it, it seems like a controlled demolition. I think it was James Forrestal, the first Secretary of Defense. He told Joe McCarthy, of course, James Forrestal mysteriously, fell out of a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was opposed to some of the, the birth of the national security state and other things in foreign policy. But he told Joe McCarthy that if they were simply stupid, that every once in a while they'd err in our favor, but they never do. He's talking about the establishment. And I think that's really what I perceive of this, Andy. I mean, there's nothing that's been done. And you talk about the last 4 years, it is a scorched earth. I mean, they're just literally just bringing the temple down on all of us, not trying to bolster anything. And if you study geopolitics, foreign policy, just history in general, this is a very strange time. There's no off-ramps to peace. There's no summits. There's no communication between world leaders, especially in these potential kinetic conflicts like Ukraine or what's going on in the Middle East, between Iran and Israel and the United States. There just seems like there's nothing that is stopping the forward momentum of whatever they're headed towards, some sort of, great reset. They call it that, some sort of cataclysm. But the world as we know it is going to change, and there's nothing that you and I can do about it. It's not reversible at this point. There's changes on the horizon, and again, we can prepare for that, and we can make better decisions if we have the information. That's what you and I try to do, and talk to people, at least to get them to ask a different question. We may not have all the answers, but we definitely think that you should have to ask different questions, especially in this reality. But man, we could talk forever. We'll have to end the show pretty soon because
I'd like to come back and do it with you again. I'll have you on my show too, Tony. I mean, you're a smart guy. You get it. You're one of the few people that I talk to who truly gets it. And if you're like me, this is cathartic to be able to talk to someone, because, most people you come in contact with in your daily life have no idea, and you try to help. But it's not something that's pleasant, and that's the thing. It's not about making profits and buying Ferraris. It's about protecting what you've worked so hard to obtain. It's about preparing. It's about, reining in. These are the reasons why so few people want to listen to what we have to say until it's too late. So yeah, I enjoyed the conversation too. I'd love to come back on anytime you got time. Just let me know. I'd love to pick up where we left off.
Oh, absolutely. I'll close with one last question because we didn't even talk about silver, and I've heard you talk about it before. That's what I got from you, and I didn't realize about the 500 ounces of silver in each Tomahawk missile. The military-industrial there's so much that made sense from that interview you did with Robert Kiyosaki. The wheels started turning. I go, wait a minute, that makes total sense. With J.P. Morgan Chase's role of suppressing the market and everything else, but something happened that wasn't covered by a lot of people. I think the Jerusalem Post picked it up, but Russia is adding silver as a strategic reserve asset, and along with platinum and palladium, but they really put the silver out front. I thought that was interesting. And from my reading of history, that really hasn't happened since the pre-communist Chinese, or at least that's the way I understood that. Was China was a big silver market. That was their basis for their currency. And what do you, just before as we close out, do you think that is as big a deal as I thought it was?
Yeah, it's huge, as a matter of fact. And at the same time, you have India, who's bought between 8 and 900 million ounces in the past 3 years, and China, who's the second largest producer of silver in the world. I've been talking with a guy named Sean Kun, the head of Dolly Varden Silver, who said to me, Andy, they're flying all around Latin America. The Chinese are. They're going directly to the miners, and they're disintermediating the marketplace and the banks, and they're buying the concentrate and the doré. Doré is it's a crudely refined bar that the miners will pull the silver out of the ground. They'll crudely refine it to maybe 40% or 50% pure, and then they send it to the refiners to make 999. The Chinese are saying, we'll pay twice what the West will pay. We'll buy it and ship that in the concentrate, which is like a byproduct sludge. We'll ship it back to China, and we will refine it ourselves. So you have China buying up and they're the second largest producers in the world. And they are now net importers after years of being net exporters. They're buying up unrefined silver right from the miners. India buying everything that's not nailed down as much as they can, between 8 and 900 million ounces. And lo and behold, silver's at all-time highs against the rupee. And now Russia, these three, the BRICS members, now Russia's saying, we're going to add it to our state fund, which is something, you're right, you don't ever hear that. This is huge. And when you realize that the London Metals Exchange trades 2.9 billion ounces of silver per day, that's 3.5 times annual global mine supply, 90+% of it paper naked contracts. These banks in the West are short on the LBMA between 4 and 6 billion with a B ounces of silver. It's less transparent and less regulated. It's not an exchange. It's the over-the-counter platform where it's me and you shaking hands. And so there's less regulation, less transparency, and that's why we don't know exactly how many ounces, but it's between 4 and 6 billion they're short. And at the same time, on COMEX, you have 5 banks short between 7 and 800 million ounces. These are as dumb as a mud wall. They're suppressing the price because of the military industrials complex's need for silver. There is between 500 ounces in the cone of all of these high-tech weapons, and that doesn't even take into account aerospace like the stealth bomber. And all of this stuff requires silver. Used to be reported. The military used to report their numbers. They don't anymore. The Silver Institute completely ignores it and yet says we're still going to have 230 million ounce shortfall this year, but no military involved in it. And the bigger question is, why would 5 banks hold the largest concentrated short position in any commodity traded? I got 2 minutes and I got to go, but I want to show. Can I share my screen with you?
Absolutely.
I'll show people this so that you can see it in real time. And then I got to fly, but let me share my screen here. This is a presentation I gave at Rick Rule's conference. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right. So let's find this slide. Okay. It starts right here. Let me make this bigger. Let's do this. How do I do this stupid thing? Let me just make this bigger. Okay. You can Google this right here, subcommittee S.2768. You can see it's 1942. But this is a congressional hearing. The present consumption of silver for war purposes is at the rate of 100 million ounces a year and growing rapidly. According to the War Production Board, it's only a matter of months before war demands will increase sufficiently to require at least 200 million ounces per year. It's 1942. Here are the silver supply and demand numbers for this year by the Silver Institute. Industrial, 9%. Electronics and electrical, 9%. Photovoltaics, that's solar panels, 20%. Brazing, alloy, and solders, 3%. Other industrial, 9%. Photography, -3%. Where is military? This is why you have this. The red line, this is COMEX. The red line are 4 big commercial banks. The green line are the 4 plus another 4. They're 8 commercial banks. They're the big Western 8 banks that are shorting the markets. So ask yourself, why would 8, here's crude oil right here. Why would 8 banks hold the largest concentrated short position in any commodity ever traded in the history of the COMEX in silver? Interesting, platinum, gold, palladium, the next 3. But this is the largest concentrated short position ever. And because we're holding it down to fund the military industrial complex, this is what the rest of the world is doing. This is what China and India and Russia are doing. These are the LBMA vaults. Of the 800 million ounces they have, they say it's the second lowest holdings they've ever had since they started keeping records on the LBMA, 140-year-old exchange. Of this 800,000, 500,000 or more belong to the ETFs. That leaves 300 million. It's 800 million. That leaves 300 million ounces available. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. Do I do that? Just a second. So that leaves 300 million ounces. So you end up with, they're telling you they're trading 2.9 billion ounces. They say 290 million, which is the whole float. That whole 300 is basically traded every day, but they say it's 10 times undervalued or underreported because they only report the final settlement numbers, which means that's 3 billion ounces per day they're trading, 3.5 times global mine supply annually, but it's all done on paper. So these countries are like, okay, you guys are stupid because we are now coordinated, motivated, and sophisticated and wealthy. And we know what you're doing. You're suppressing the price for whatever reason. I'm sure they know what it's for. Why do you think India's bought, between 800 and 900 million ounces? Why is the largest producer or second largest producer of silver in the world flying all around Latin America buying doré and concentrate? And now why is Russia buying it? Because they know it's not industrial, it's strategic. And the West has held the price down forever to allow the military industrial complex to create weapons, to fund the ever-increasing wars. They play both sides. If you had silver where it should be, it would be too expensive to make these weapons. It would change the dynamics of this country very quickly, or at least the power elite. That's why you have these banks suppressing the price, as stupid as it is. And that's why the rest of the world has caught on to it. And many of these countries in the South, like China, Russia, and India, so we'll do the jiu-jitsu. We'll use the leverage of your opponent against them. We'll drain the exchanges. This is why they're not bitching about it. But they're forming their own exchanges at the same time, like the Shanghai Metals Exchange and the exchange in Moscow. And they talked about the BRICS Gold Exchange this last meeting and the Dubai Exchange, which will take over legitimacy. In fact, in the last 6 months, the volume in the Shanghai Metals and Gold Exchange is up over 500%. It's now the second most heavily traded metals exchange in the world, surpassing the COMEX. They're gaining legitimacy. They're buying up all of our commodities using the suppression as a tool for subsidy. It's the dumbest thing in the world. So that's going to change. And you'll wake up one day and silver will be way higher than you could ever imagine because it will result in a failure to deliver or something along those lines that creates a panic in the market. Prices go up, short positions have to cover, or one of these 8 commercial banks says, I'm not going down with all you guys. It's every man for himself. Buy, I'm out, I'm covering. And bang, you get short covering, the short squeeze, or boom, 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 boom. It just goes higher than you can imagine. And it's an existential threat to some of these commercial banks who are stupid enough to maintain that leveraged, naked short position in an environment where countries like China, Russia, and India are saying, this is how we beat you. Instead of going into a war, we'll just drain the exchanges using your stupidity, using your suppression, and the ability to stand for delivery where no one ever did. That's how this all breaks apart.
Well, Andy, thank you for making the complex digestible. Thank you for your leadership. And I wanted to say as we close, there's an old joke from the Nixon administration. He had a speechwriter named Herbert Stein, And Pat Buchanan would joke about it and said there was they called it Herbert Stein's law. It says if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And it looks like that's going to be true here with all of these commodities and pricing and metals, the financial system itself. But interesting times, and thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
You know, that's a Chinese curse, brother. May you
Yes,
live
I
in
know.
interesting times. So they are, unfortunately. I preferred it when it were, you know, mellow. But nonetheless, Tony, you're a good man. I'd love to pick up where we left off. I'd love to come back anytime, and I'd love to have you on my show as well.
I love that.
So thanks for having me, and you know, God bless this country. It's going to be an interesting week. Let's hope let's hope we're all wrong in what we see, and that this is a smooth transition and a good model for the U.S. to start to, you know, move forward from. So, in any case, thanks again for having me, and I look forward to doing it with you again.
Appreciate you, Andy.
See you, brother.
Thank you. All right, folks. What a great interview. I've wanted to talk to Andy for a very long time, and I'm hoping we'll talk again soon. And be sure and share the episode. I'm going to put this out on all the channels, not just the Wise Wolf channel, but be sure and share the episode. Go check Andy's channel out. Make sure you follow him and anything that he's doing. Always a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate everybody who tunes in. We will see you next time. In a world of bulls and bears, be the wolf.